O te timatanga o tēnei hui i roto i te wiki o te reo Māori, ka korero ki a koutou, ka korero ahau ki a koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Mō te timatanga, ka hoatu ahau te take, mō te kaikarakia mō te timatanga, me etahi atu whakaaro o Pieri. Kia ora, Pieri.
Tēnā koe e te tiomana. Nau nei i te mata i whakaritea i tātā te runga ki tēnei e kia nei ko te wiki o te reo Māori. Nō reira tēnei au e mihi kia koe. Kei āku rangatira, tā tēnā pito, tā tēnā pito, tā tēnā pito. Kei ngā whaituatanga o tēnei te mata o a Māori, nei au mihi kia koutou katoa. Tō reira nau mai hoki mai. To all of our esteemed appointees of this, the Regional Planning Committee, I welcome you back to this session. Hoi anō ka tika kia mihi ki o tātou nei mata. Me ki rā te mate nunui o tēnā te kuini o Ingarangi iri hāpiti e te tuarua. Ka tika kia mihi. Me ki rā te nui te awarere maringi hea moena. Nō reira tēnei te mihi kia ia. Tai hoki rā ki tēnā o ngā kōtiro. I tahuna mai rā, ka runga ki tēnā te rohe nei. Āriki Rigby. Te kaumā ware o ona tau, he parekura tēnā. Just acknowledging Queen Elizabeth II's death, and one which I will call for a minute's silence in due course, but also to join with that the recent identification of the young lady that was murdered in the Evacuation River Reserve Road out in Havelock. Me ki rangama te katoa kei rungi a tātou. Tā tēnā o tātou. Tēnā i au kei te whakaiki, ka hoki mai tētahi o ngā tūpāpaku ki runga te marae, te ahi nei. Hoi anō amuri aki tēnā, tō tātou nei komiti haere, ka tahi ka hoki au i te pai. And also with those that from whom we all individually, collectively bereave, including myself. We have one of my cousins who died in a motorcycle accident on Sunday. He's returning to our marae this afternoon. So, ngā mate katoa. E pikau hea ka ngā poko hiwi i o tātou mana. Tēnei ka mihi. We'll observe a minute's silence first, Queen Elizabeth, but also for all those mate that rest upon our shoulders. And then after that, I'll conduct a poroporaki. A minute's silence as from here. Kia ora tātou. E te kuini ko koutou rā ngamate e noho nei ke rungi o tātou katoa. Puta noa kei roto ki tēnei e kēnei ko te whare te kaunihera aro e te matau a Māui. Tēnei au, tēnei tātou, e mihi ki o koutou. Koutou kiri e whakaatu ki te raukawa ka kino ka kino ki te one ki tūru pū, ki tūru mō, ke hukatai e taha. Nāna nei i au, tipuna hei kai wharawhara ko te tāpiki o takapautere e hua kairaro. Ura noa te tangata i āku piki tani whākamā kere he tiki pau nā mau he patu tonga rerewa. Tangi haere atu rā ki te mata ki te wā oki ai o koutou. Kei tua o ārai, kei tua pai mau mahara. Koutou rā haere ki te wāhi tuturu matau e ta tangata, koutou kia koutou hoki mai rā kia tātou katoa. I might just add that when the Queen toured back in, crikey, about a wee while ago now, and her son was here for a week earlier, then I was in the Royal Planning Committee, and so got to spend a little bit of time with the Queen and also with Prince Philip. Got our own individual time for about 5 to 12 minutes, which was a wonderful lady to be in the presence of. A huge loss, but what an example to follow. To dedicate one's life to the service of the Commonwealth and to the people. Example for all of us. Hoi anō mō tēnei kara, he kara kia mō tēnei hui o tata. And it's up on the board there. You set the volume, I shall set the pace. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā ki te kina. Kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi hake ana te atakura, e teo, e huka, e hau, ti hei, mauri ora. E a kuranga tira tēnā koutou katoa ka hori nei te rāku ki a koe te tiamana.
Kia ora, Pieri. I don't have any notices, but I'm turning to my right to see if... And no notices? All right, so moving on to the apologies. We have received apologies from Apiata Tāpene, Mike Mohi, Councillor Neil Curtin and Corona Brown. Has anyone else received any apologies? No? Can I move that we receive the apologies?
I'll second them.
Thank you. And as carried. All right. Sorry, was it carried?
Yes. Aye. We're all in favour.
I just make that assumption, aroha mai. So on this page, it then says that I'm to do housekeeping, which is kind of interesting. It says, this meeting is live streamed and recorded for viewing at a later date on our YouTube channel. I don't know how many of us go back and watch it again, but maybe if there are issues that you want to make sure that you set it right, then you would, or you just want to see yourself on the screen. Number 2, in an earthquake, and we're all used to this, drop, cover and hold. If the shaking is long and strong, we leave the building through this doorway here, which is clearly marked for those of you on that side of the table. I was sitting here saying, where's the sign? Through the exit, and we meet out on the corner of Dalton Street. And I know you've all heard this before, but just making sure that we have it fresh this morning. Evacuation, if an emergency alarm sounds, we evacuate the building through, again, the nearest exit and proceed to the assembly point. The council chamber, this is an interesting one because it hasn't been updated. The council chamber is not currently it is currently designated as a public place, and the council's policy is that a 1 metre physical distancing is required and face masks to be used. And I notice that none of us have followed that because we're all following the Prime Minister's direction that we're actually out of the green traffic light system and back into normal. So I would suggest that that's my one task of housekeeping today, is to take number 4 off the housekeeping list. And the toilets are located through the double doors behind some of us, in front of some of us, and down the hall to the left. So, even though we started a little bit late, we're finishing that. Oh no, we're not, because we now need a declaration of conflicts of interest. Those of you who have read the agenda, can you indicate whether there are any conflicts of interest? No, nobody's sort of putting their hand up at this moment. So I think whatever you've already got listed as conflicts would already stand. Confirmation of the minutes held on the 15th of June, 2002. These are unconfirmed, but I am trusting that everyone has read these minutes who were present, and those who weren't present read it to find out what we did. Anyone want to bring up any matters, or do I? Okay, so I move that we receive these minutes, and I see that Jeff, and welcome back, has seconded that. Right, carried. Yes, has this been carried?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, look at that. All these things that I have to remember to say out loud. Follow-ups from previous meetings. Are there any follow-ups from previous meetings? And they're on page 3.
E rau rangatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Na mihi nui noha hanga. The items in the follow-ups will take as read, albeit the Te Pou Whakarai may be able to give a verbal update in relation to the terms of reference item.
Tēnā koe, James. Thank you, Chair. I've followed up, so to Wairama, who's part of the Māori Partnerships team, she has sent out the letters to the appointors, and we've not received anything back yet. She's going to send another one this afternoon, and I'll ask her to CC you all in, if I'm able, so that you're able to perhaps join or urge our appointors to come back with the consideration of the terms of reference.
Thank you. Any other, no other follow-ups to be mentioned? So do we receive this report?
So moved.
So moved by Jeff, Councillor Jeff. Seconder?
Deputy Second.
Oh, sorry, thank you. With my reading glasses, thank you very much. And the last one, calling for minor items that are not on the agenda. I don't see any hands. So a short meeting's a good meeting. So we can move on to the first decision item that we have on our is going to present. Okay, so Desiree Cole, are you coming to do?
And I think Petey might be joining.
And Pierre?
Perhaps I could lead, and Desi might be able to fill in the gaps that I leave.
Right,
Tēnā
thank
koe,
you.
Chair. So first off, I just want to acknowledge, I understand Ricky Ellison is on Zoom, and Tania, but Ricky, I just want to thank you for sending through an update from your 14 September hui, at which there were tangata whenua representatives from this RPC. You had your pre-meeting and you did give consideration to this paper, and as a result you've also sent back some thoughts and discussion in regards to the content of the paper. That only arrived yesterday, and my apology to all of our RPC members seated around the table is that we've not had time to actually send that to you. That said, there were considerations and some points that related to the terms of reference, and we've taken note of those points, but in particular you've identified particular recommendations that, Chair, I'm not sure whether you would wish to put those in as amendments and additions to the ones that are in this paper. I'm happy to go through those if you wish to pass those back to me.
Right.
But in essence, aside from just contesting some parts of the terms of reference for the RPC, you have made particular recommendations at the end, and I can
go through those, Chair, unless there's any questions that people want to consider now. Desi, is there anything else I need to add? Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I am directed by the tangata whenua to present these recommendations. Right, so these are the ones I have here. So in the recommendations, we had approved recommendations 1 and 2 in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council report and replace recommendations 3 and 4 with number 3, to agree to strategic pay being appointed as the sole appointee to undertake the independent review of remuneration for tangata whenua representatives on the Regional Planning Committee, subject to agreement on the process and criteria for the review. And the next recommendation, note the tangata whenua representatives have delegated authority to Alana Hiha and Mike Mohi to represent the TWR regarding the remuneration review. And in our consideration of that would be that we would work with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council co-chair and relevant staff to finalise the process and the criteria for the RPC remuneration review, noting the review of the Māori Committee needs to be considered separately from our review. Is that all we need to table just now? Or do we go over and do the...
There are these additional, but you have already spoken to those, Chair, so I think you've covered off the point.
If I may, Madam Chair, are you referring to the advice given yesterday by Rick?
Yes.
Okay.
And this advice came out of our hui last week.
If I could, through you,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Laura and I didn't receive any of that comms because we weren't on that email list, so that's why we weren't part of the hui last week. We had no idea that was happening.
Okay. Aroha mai.
So what you're reading off, is that the email that was sent out yesterday, or is that what's in the Stella?
It's different.
this
Yeah,
is
it's the email. Stella's different.
Yeah, so I'm like,
I
which one
didn't
am I
get the one
reading?
yesterday from Ricky
So that's-
You
either.
two,
They're basically amendments to the recommendations
Yes.
with the papers we have. But I've just got a question around the paper.
aroha mai.
CE or someone may just ask, but I'll just wait for probably James
Yes.
to answer.
Chair, just
Yes. We just have a...
Yeah, just to help our process moving forward, I'll send Ricky's paper, which includes the recommendations that have been made through the tangata whenua representatives, to Anna Lee. Anna Lee can record those in there and perhaps sort of bring them up. And if there's any other discussion on the paper, that could happen now until
Yes.
Anna Lee actually puts that up on the screen.
Is that all right with you?
Yes, I've still got a question though.
Sure. And your question is for
It's
James?
probably, James, it's just on 13.6 in the paper where it's been taken out of the terms of reference, which was a reference to the remuneration authority for setting councillor fees. So just talk us through your thinking in around that, and that this body is a formal part of the council. They cover everything and anything we do as far as this is concerned. And it kind of, just as I read that, it puts this as an outlier. It doesn't say abide by, it just says reference to, and that's even been taken out. So could you just enrich us a wee bit as to why that is? And I presume, as the chair noted earlier, there's a further discussion in the Māori Advisory Committee. So I imagine the framework of this will probably be very similar elsewhere. So I'm always one to try and keep things consistent. So if we were reviewing, say, the council's same terms of reference, we'd have to have that in there. And so to me, the linkage of the formal council and back up to the Crown Government is slightly weakened in my eyes by not referencing their authority in this space.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. This may be better explained by Mr. Ide, who is in the back of the room and has greater carriage of this process of amending the terms of reference, but I'll have a go. I believe that originally there was reference to the Remuneration Authority setting of councillor fees on the basis of just providing clarity that the fee setting process is outlined in the terms of reference related only to the tangata whenua representatives, and that and just really for clarity that the councillors' fees were set by a separate and independent process. I suspect that it was suggested that it be deleted on the basis of stating the obvious and not being necessary to have in there, but I think there's no harm in some respects of being clear that the Remuneration Authority is the entity that sets a remuneration for councillors, and that there is no duplicative process or additional process or no additional remuneration available to councillors for performing their duties under this committee. So I think that's probably, I'm getting a nod, that's the reason that it was proposed for deletion.
Sure, and I'm not talking about additional or not. I'm just thinking, actually, this template is pretty much normally what we do for the council, and I'm wondering why it's different for this committee, in that this committee is such an important part and arm of our aspirations and the council, or maybe Rick's got some ideas.
Certainly.
I give to the council the advice that I've given previously, and that is that the Remuneration Authority is responsible for council and councillors. It is not responsible for the committees. The committees are set by council themselves, and we have tried to get the Remuneration Authority to take responsibility for setting remuneration for the Regional Planning Committee, and to some extent for the Māori Committee, so it wouldn't be such a difficult process for us, but they have steadfastly refused to do so. So there's a clear line. They set the remuneration for councillors and committees, the responsibility of council, because the council, I think, is what they would see it as, creates them itself. Notwithstanding the fact that the RPC is a creature of statute, it doesn't, in the making of the statute, does not reference the setting of the fees to the Remuneration Authority. And so the Remuneration Authority says it has no responsibility. So that's a clear line there. It remains, it's a problem, but you can't change it easily.
And I just think, thanks with your forbearance, Chair, I understand that, but my point was being, it says reference to, because I agree, and you've tried, and well done. Does seem quirky that they haven't, but anyway, it's the point being, actually, it's just referencing it. There's some tools available for us to reference as we go through this, because if this was, I don't know, some other committee we might decide to form about something, I don't understand what will not be there. So, Chair, I just strongly suggest that is left in there as a reference. That's my point of view. I hear what the Chair's just said, and that makes eminent sense, but I can't see any harm by leaving it in there, just for keep it simple and consistent. And to me, as we're in Wellington arguing the merits of this particular committee with all the other reforms, to make it somehow different in some way, right, we should grasp onto any of those governmental tools as we can to help legitimise it. That's my argument, but I'll leave it there, and I'll make the committee's will.
Kia ora, and that has been recorded. I note that we have a question online from Tanya Hopmans, and then after her, Councillor Martin, you have a question or comment as well. So Tanya, if we could hear from you.
Ata Māori, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry, I can't get my video to work this morning. It's working against me, but no loss there for you guys. Just coming back to the question that was asked just now, the reason why it's important to have reference to the Remuneration Authority is because if you have a look at the terms of reference, so there's two different things we're talking about here. One is the terms of reference for the RPC, and the other one is the terms of reference for this review for remuneration. If you have a look in the appendix to the paper that we've been given for today's meeting on this kaupapa, page 13 of our papers, it states there from the terms of reference for the RPC what must be considered by the independent appointees who are going to look at remuneration. So if you look at 13.2.2, one of the key things that the appointees must have regard to is the need to achieve and maintain fair relativity with the levels of remuneration received by elected representatives in RMA policy development roles, i.e. those holding similar roles or councillors, if you like, for the regional council. So that is one of the things they must have regard to. So from that perspective, I accept that the Remuneration Authority doesn't have authority to determine our remuneration as tangata whenua reps, but it's obviously relevant if we're looking at some sort of parity between tangata whenua reps and councillors. So having access to that information from the Remuneration Authority, how it determines the councillors' remuneration is relevant. So I would say it should be kept in there. My understanding is that the reason back in the day when we negotiated the terms for the Regional Planning Committee was, I think the Remuneration Authority under legislation or regulation has, has set out what entities it's going to be able to set remuneration for. And my recollection is that the RPC obviously wasn't one of those because it wasn't contemplated and it didn't fit within the suite of what the Remuneration Authority does. So you're quite right, Councillor. It's not saying that the Remuneration Authority is setting our tangata whenua fees, but it's a useful reference to understand how we might come to parity between both groups. So that was my comment on that. So I think it should stay in there. The other thing is that I wasn't able to be at the tangata whenua reps hui, but I totally endorse the comments that they've made in their paper that was circulated to some yesterday, I think it was. Given we're here today too, and this is our only decision item, my suggestion is that, Madam Chair, that perhaps it would be helpful if Ricky Ellison goes through the points in the paper that was intended to be circulated to councillors. We get it up on screen and we just step through those points because we're here today. We might as well make a decision on it and consider the comments and the feedback.
Thank you, Tanya. That's I think that's wise counsel because I was thinking I think Ricky should speak on this. But before we go to you, Ricky, Councillor Martin had Councillor Williams, I should say, had a comment to make, a question. The floor is yours, sir.
Morena koutou ina raurangatira o te rohi te mātou a Māui. Ko tēnei tuku taku pātai, and it may be answered by what's about to come. But Annalie, could you please put the resolution as it appears up there, or as is now proposed? Could you scroll up, please? Now the last bit, 6. Right, that was the question, in that we had a recommendation that both the RPC and the Māori Committee representatives be addressed in the one review. I understand now that there has been a meeting of the tangata whenua representatives of this committee last week, and I was just wanting to understand the rationale for untangling those two dimensions of this review. Bearing in mind our decision-making without walls model and the journey ahead of us with kotahi of both Māori Committee and RPC working together. Okay. I just wanted to understand that context because it's quite a difference from the recommendation in the paper.
Right, thank you for that question. And I'm going to give you a lay answer before I hand over to Ricky, who is our legal brain and and also able to support that. But in my understanding, the members of the RPC tangata whenua committee are all elected members of their settlement trust boards, and we have a responsibility in the tangata whenua or in the RPC to act as governors, as governing councillors, or with equal weight as you councillors have, all right? And it's important for us to all report back regularly to our appointing bodies who have elected us to our positions. So that is a different weight that we carry, whereas the Māori Committee have a consultation role to sit alongside the council to give input on various issues, but not necessarily to be involved in policy making. So that's me as a very lay member of this committee, but can I?
Chair, could I possibly just add before you pass to Ricky on
Yes.
that? So the Māori Committee had its meeting last week and they considered this paper, but it was presented them in terms of them being the Māori Committee, and this has been presented to the RPC in that format. They approved the recommendations in the paper for the strategic pay to be the independent reviewer. That said, I do appreciate the comments that have come back in relation to the RPC, and I think what determines or distinguishes them through them, even though we're still using strategic pay for both of them, is their independent terms of reference, charter, and also for the Regional Planning Committee, their terms of reference. That's the distinction that the independent reviewer would be working toward.
Right. Kia ora. Kate Pine? Yep. All right, so can I hand now to Ricky on our
Oh, sorry, Alana, Madam Chair, sorry, just a bit hard to see my hand up, I think. Just before Ricky comments, I'd just like to respond to Martin's question. It's fine for strategic pay to conduct a review of the remuneration for both the Māori Committee and the RPC in my view, but they're separate reviews. They have different roles and they shouldn't be combined in this paper coming to the RPC. The Māori Committee should, make decisions about matters that affect it, and the RPC should make decisions about the RPC matters that affect it. And in this case, in terms of the tangata whenua reps, it's the tangata whenua reps. So I think we are working collaboratively together, but we have separate roles and responsibilities and they should be kept separate. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you, Tanya. And we have another comment, Ricky, we're just testing your patience from the CE.
Araha mai noho hangai. Look, I just wanted to perhaps briefly respond to that concern raised by Tanya and just acknowledge that absolutely the work of strategic pay will consider the roles of the committees distinctly and separately. It is absolutely understood that the functions are different, and I think the current remuneration arrangements reflect the difference in the functions of the two committees. It just seemed from a staff point of view to be efficient to have one review conducted by strategic pay, looking at both committees at the same time. I think it's cheaper for council overall to have the consultants considering both, and indeed to some extent I think it's useful for them to compare and contrast the differing roles of the two committees when they provide their recommendations. So there was no intention to collapse the remuneration framework into one for the two committees, just to be clear.
Thank you, James. And thank you, Tanya, for that comment. Handing over now to you. I'm solely focused on you, Ricky.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kia ora tātou. So just to go through the paper, from the tangata whenua representative's perspective, there was three key issues. The terms of reference, clause 13.2, the terms of reference provide for two reviewers to be appointees, two independent persons, which is what the terms of reference says. What I think the proposal is to have one, the tangata whenua reps are comfortable with appointing strategic pay solely to do that job. Just wanted to note that was a deviation from what the terms of reference require, that there's supposed to be 2. The second point is, I guess, what the status or nature of the work that strategic pay is doing. So the terms of reference in clause 13.2 say the level of remuneration shall be determined promptly following each triennial election of the councillors by 2 independent persons. Key word, I guess, being determined. So the paper in the agenda pack, on my reading, implies that strategic pay would make a recommendation to the council and the full council would determine whether they accepted that pay rate, I guess, from strategic pay. My reading of the terms of reference is that strategic pay, or the appointees, whoever that may be, if it's strategic pay, then that's the appointee. They determine what the remuneration shall be, and that's not up to the council to further approve that. I guess it's a process point. I guess I just wanted to be clear. I think that needs to be clear in terms of everybody being on the same page, that everybody's understanding what the process is. That the terms of reference say that the remuneration shall be determined by the independent persons, the appointees. I think there was an implication in the agenda paper that they would make a recommendation to the council, which would then be approved by the council or not be approved. So there was that point. And going on from that, I guess the last reviews, this is done every 3 years following the council elections. The last review, strategic pay, they initially came back and had rated the Tangata Whenua representatives as being on the level of a policy analyst sort of scale. I think that caused some consternation amongst the Tangata Whenua representatives, and that was rejected, I guess, and sent back. So I just think if whatever the process is, whether it's going to the council, or my view is that it's strategic pay on their own determining the remuneration rate. Whatever that is, then I think there needs to be a process for ensuring that they have followed the criteria to the letter. And if they've deviated from those criteria, there needs to be a process of feedback to them saying, you've missed the mark a little bit here. This needs to be corrected or reconsidered based on the criteria that are set. So there's that point. The third point is the criteria that are being that strategic pay would use, or the appointee would use to do the assessment of the remuneration. I think there's some things in the agenda paper as it stands now that didn't quite align for the Tangata Whenua reps. So clause 13.7 refers to the current arrangements and salary setting arrangements for Tangata Whenua reps of the RPC and Māori Committee. Taking the Māori Committee aside, I think we've dealt with that question. That's a little bit circular. It refers to the current arrangement, or the current arrangements, in my understanding of this process. So that's it's not a big deal. It's just I just think you can take that out. Provide remuneration advice consistent with similar organisations throughout New Zealand. I think that's supported in principle, and it's a useful benchmark to use. Just wanted to understand what those organisations might be, rather than leaving it open to being similar organisations without any certainty of what those organisations might be. I'm unaware of any. Well, there's Tupoko Taia in Wellington, which is slightly different. It's not a statutory body, but there's not very many co-governance sort of arrangements like the Regional Planning Committee across Aotearoa. So I think there was just a question mark around what those similar organisations might be, and wanted some certainty around what they would be measured against under clause 13.8. 13.9 referred to the State Services Commission Cabinet Fees Framework 2012. Uncertain why that had been referenced, because that's not something that's used elsewhere across local government. And you've just had the conversation around the need to align yourself with the Remuneration Authority, which is different again to State Services Commission Cabinet Fees Framework. So it was uncertain, and I don't think the Tangata Whenua rep supported that reference being in there, because it's not something that's used elsewhere in the local government framework. So uncertain why that had been included. And again, the 13.11, there's some repetition of the SSC Cabinet Fees Framework in there again. So those were the key points, I guess. I'll read my paper. So what had been proposed in the recommendation, or the alternative recommendations being put forward, as Madam Chair referred to, approved the recommendations 1 and 2, wanted to replace the recommendations 3 and 4 Accepting strategic pay has been the appointee to determine the remuneration scales. But that was, in this context, only for the tangata whenua representatives on the RPC, not for the Māori committee. That should be dealt independently. And the tangata whenua reps wanted to delegate their authority to Alana and Mike Mohi, the representatives for tangata whenua group, to finalise, I guess, the criteria for the review, working alongside Councillor Barker and others as needed on behalf of the HBRC. And that group then would determine what those criteria are, because just picking up on those points that the SESC cabinet fees framework, what those similar organisations around New Zealand might be, those things need to be clarified before I think they were comfortable with agreeing to the final process. So rather than bouncing back and forth with the RPC as a total, we just delegate that authority to the co-chairs and Alana and Mike to work through that process and agree on it together. I think that was the main gist of the paper. Thanks, Madam Chair. Happy to answer questions.
You're welcome. So are there any questions for Ricky? Yes, Councillor Foss.
Thanks, Ricky. Particularly the explanation up the front there, where this change from determination, who's actually determining what it should be. So I'd just like to clarify, what is the intent or where are we landed given these new recommendations? And again, I'd suggest that everything we do is two committees, and so we can't, I would struggle that some outside independent or not body was determining things here, because essentially that puts them at a higher level than the council itself. That's just, maybe that's just a drafting error, I presume. So what the situation is there.
All right, do you have a response, Ricky?
What I've recorded there is the language that's used in the terms of reference. It does say the two independent appointees, one appointed by the council and one appointed by the tangata whenua representatives, will determine the remuneration scales.
Yeah.
That if that's a typo, then that's a typo. That's a mistake or something that needs to be addressed in the terms of reference. I'm not sure that it's a mistake, but if that wants to be addressed, then it'll be a matter for the terms of reference to be reviewed. I guess I'm probably can't say much more than that, but that is the language in the terms of reference as it stands.
Maybe it was the criteria, determine the criteria.
Process and criteria, that's what it said in
but
point 4.
Ricky's read that differently. So just the clarification is all I'm chasing.
All right, thank you. And I see that Tanya Hopmans has her red light shining. So Tanya, can we hear from you, please?
Oh, thanks. It's not a mistake. I was involved in the drafting of the terms of reference along with Liz Lambert at the time, and so was Crown, I don't know if it was Crown Law actually, or MFE solicitors, and it went through quite a rigorous process because the terms of reference, these first terms of reference, were drafted alongside the RPC Act, and they were to be read together because they were the first terms of reference. So it's not a mistake. It's not, I don't think it's trying to lord it over the councillors at all. It was an attempt to find a way to determine remuneration that was fair and was in some way independent of council, because the council doesn't determine its own remuneration. The Remuneration Authority does. This was a way for council and tangata whenua to appoint qualified people to determine what that rate would be based on those criteria that were set out in the terms of reference. So it's not a free-for-all, it's referenced, and it was two independently appointed, I suppose, people who would do that, and that's the process. It's not a mistake.
Thank you, Tanya. Is there any?
Can we just have the recommendation back up again, please?
Yes.
Can we just give it?
And
Question,
certainly.
just for clarity, well, I'm just after what Tanya said. Who will be the ultimate authority on determining the rate? Will it be the appointed committee, or will it be the committee making a recommendation to council, which will then have to sign it off? In the past, it's always been the committee makes a recommendation and the council signs it off, because only councillors can authorise the expenditure of ratepayer money. This is different from the Remuneration Authority, who has statutory powers to set the rates, and the council has no option but to accept what they determine. It is a determination. So there is a thing. So just if we get clarity about that, I think that'll ease people's minds about where we're going.
Thank you.
You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Ricky. Aroha mai.
I can't provide legal advice because I don't hold a practice certificate currently, but what I would say, I think, is, so the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee Act says the council will meet those costs of determining the remuneration to be paid by tangata whenua members, or paid to tangata whenua members, and reimbursement of expenses consistent with terms of reference. Terms of reference says the remuneration shall be determined promptly following the triennial election by two independent persons, which to me implies independent persons will determine what their remuneration is, and consistent with the HBRC RPC Act. Those things are mutually confirming in my view, but you may want to seek legal advice on that. Like I said, I can't provide that.
Well, I'm just going by past practice. There's been a recommendation come up, and council has then decided what it's going to be. So that's practice. But for the next council, have to decide what it's going to be.
Maybe, Chair, because it's a very pertinent issue, but to help through.
Yes.
And this work is, it's going to, well, I'm not sure when it starts, after the election, I think. That with, the way we try to operate around this table, we can get a wee bit stuck here on something which I don't think anyone intends for it to be stuck. At least it's a valid issue that we, I would propose that we just kind of, well, my point is we amend that wording so the council itself maintains its normal processing of two committees, the ultimate check writer, basically. With all due respect to what Tanya was saying earlier with her earlier work and with previous officials, and then what's in the Act, we are suffering for Wellington's ignorance of what we're trying to do and how we do things here. So we can also solve things and set the path for others who are, are going to look to our example around the country, I think. So I'd just like to volunteer someone who's a better wordsmith than me, if that's acceptable, to just finding some words through, which doesn't actually create some new precedent or something like that and make this committee different, as we all work so hard to make it the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Foss. I see Tanya. She may be responding to your comment. I'm not sure.
That's correct. Thank you. Councillor Foss, we can't, at this committee, just change the terms of reference, if that's what you're talking about, the terms of reference for the RPC, which sets out how remuneration is determined. That was agreed by council and all the PSGEs as part of the process earlier on. So if we wanted to do that, we have to amend the terms of reference. So we can't do that today. I think Ricky's suggestion is a good one. What happened last time was a function of frustration that the report that was prepared by Strategic Pay had fallen short of what it was supposed to do. And I think at the time, James, you'll recall that you came up with a pragmatic solution, just said, look, we've wasted a lot of time going through the Strategic Pay process. We've come out with a report which actually doesn't follow what the terms of reference said it should have done. So it's flawed. In the interest of expediency, James recommended, how about we just go with this for now? And tangata whenua agreed with that. That was being expedient. We've got an opportunity to do this process correctly. If people are concerned about, who's signing the cheque and shouldn't the council have the final say, I agree with Ricky. That's not what the Act and not what the terms of reference say. So let's just get it clarified. Let's get some legal advice telling us whether the process that the tangata whenua reps are requesting be followed is the correct process to follow. And then we'll know. And then we'll know going forward. I would prefer we do that because as I say, this process was well discussed and vetted by numerous groups and authorities, including the Crown and Council. So, yeah, I guess I'm imploring people to follow the words of what it says. If we're uncertain or people would like some assurance, then let's just get some advice and sort it out.
All right, thank you. And I see, are you responding to Tanya? And then after you, Hinuai. Is that all right? All right, James, thank you.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I'm just wondering whether it would be worth saving us the expense of a legal review to keep that in the back pocket in the event that we actually have an issue that needs resolution here. The recommendations of the Regional Planning Committee to Council are ones that have some significant constraints around council discretion to deviate from, and that's embedded in the legislation in any event. I would have every expectation that the recommendation would be adhered to by council, and I think it would be an unusual situation, particularly given the collaborative nature of the way in which the recommendations have come together that suggest a partnership around the development of the process and the criteria, an independent, reputable party providing the recommendation. I would have every expectation that we would land in a place that everybody's comfortable with, and therefore that the recommendations of the RPC through to council would carry through. I think everybody's probably a little bit correct here, in so much as it is, as we know, with respect to plan changes, the final decision of council to adopt, to notify plans, and that the Act requires that. But the Act also makes clear that the substantive decisions are to be made by this committee, and the recommendation is to some extent pro forma, because if the council is uncomfortable with those recommendations, it must refer back to this committee, and then the legislation refers to dispute resolution process. So that reinforces the view that Parliament's intention was that this committee arrive at a view and try to resolve everything, and that the council's final step is something of a formality. And I would expect the same approach to be taken on remuneration. So can I suggest to the committee that it might not be necessary to try and solve a problem that we don't actually yet have and may not yet have, and that we follow the process that's set out in the suggested amendments to the recommendations, and then if we find ourselves in some bother at that point, we could seek some legal advice to assist us through resolving that.
Right, thank you for that clarity. I noted a number of words over this discussion that suit our time: expediency, pragmatism, and latterly, even though you didn't mention it, financial fiscal responsibility. But before I hand over for further, I see that Hinuai Councillor has a
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's been some themes that have come out today that came out with the Māori Committee when this item was presented. And I think it goes back to the goodwill and the actual fair, reflective remuneration based on the role and the responsibility of tangata whenua, and back to those bodies that mandate them. So I'm quite comfortable with these adjusted recommendations. And the reason why is because I think there has to be a process where tangata whenua get to share their views, their inputs, and what it is actually like being a governor around this table, and what those roles entail, because that will dictate those factors built into the review, and therefore will will spit out whatever continuum of remuneration that looks fair for the role that they complete. So, I mean, I'm happy with the two recommended there to be a part of that process. And I think we need that insight into what it is like for tangata whenua sitting around this table. And that only makes the recommendation stronger and truer in reflection of the role that they play. And then going down to the further recommendations, with the Māori committee, possibly we can have a similar process that reflects their role. So you've got a dual process going on with input from those tangata whenua, from those committees, to inform the review that will eventually come back to this committee and then come back to council for decision.
Right.
Those are my views around this matter. Thank you.
So I see Charles and Laura. So we'll go ladies first.
Oh, are you talking to me? Am I the lady? No. Kia ora, Councillor Ormsby. I tautoko your sentiments, and it just reminds me of when we were to recruit our new CE for HTST. There's actually no remuneration at that level in order to pay appropriately and value driven, and reflecting the amount of work that a PGSE CE does in comparison to Wari CE, for example. My question though, because we weren't privy to the conversation last week, but hey aha, we'll get there, is if those two, and I agree with the recommendations, by the way, if the two tangata whenua reps, what responsibility are you guys willing to have back to the rest of us? Because we want to be able to help shape the input.
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly. And I'm looking at Teresa and Nikki, because they were in that. We had, as you can imagine, we had a long debate over this to get to this point of view. So do either of you want to give input at this stage? Because aroha mai, Apiata and Mike were also there, but both of them have other responsibilities today.
No, I'd just like to tautoko
Okay.
the recommendations.
Kia ora, and Nikki?
Yes, I like to support the process here and run that deal process for the Māori committee. It's more efficient. But it's actually about, it's just reviewing the process. It's not the remuneration as such.
No.
So
And-
I support.
Thank you. And to respond to you, Laura, at that point, Mike and I both agreed that we couldn't put all 9 of us in that decision-making body, and we were the 2 that put our hands up. So aroha mai.
I'm
can
just
jump in
wondering
if you
if
want.
when you're going through the review with strategic pay, are we privy to
No, we
that?
won't be part of that. In my understanding, it's with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council chair and staff just to figure out what the process is, because strategic pay will do their own process.
Well, that highlights the concerns of point 19 and 20 that Ricky's done. That they done it inappropriately and aligned our roles as policy advisors.
Right, and that's what
Yeah.
we're going to unpack rather than before they get to that point.
Chair, could
Yes,
I perhaps just be helpful here? Look, I'm reminded by Mr. Ide that it was a separate provider previously that undertook, Mr. David Shannon, I believe, that
That's
undertook
right.
the previous review that was unsatisfactory. It wasn't strategic pay. And yes, there was in that previous exercise an equivalency to policy advisor roles that was undertaken. And it is noted that that was considered inappropriate. And I think, to be fair to Mr. Shannon at the time, he was dealing with the very issue that has already been discussed, and that is the lack of comparable entities nationally. So he was struggling to find a sort of a skill set that sat there, but obviously that's quite distinct from a governance role. So I would have every confidence that strategic pay will look at this very much through a governance lens and look comparably at comparable governance roles nationally.
All right, let's put these motions
All
on the
right,
floor.
before that, councillor Lambert has had his hand up for a long time. But I let ladies to go first.
Awa rongo mai wahi nevi.
Where do we get those old views from? Anyway, I'd like to just thank
'Cause I'm
Tanya,
old.
first of all, for the clarification and the historical point of view of the purpose of the RPC and why it was constituted. And James's point of view too, that we all know the idea was for us to come together and make agreements, and whoever the final decision doesn't matter because everything has to come back to this group anyway. So I agree with the recommendations from the RPC, and yeah, we may have been a bit too hasty in trying to put Māori committee in here too. They're two independent committees, and we need to treat them as such until we agree otherwise.
Right.
Yeah. So-
Councillor Williams and then councillor Foss. Aroha mai, councillor Foss.
I guess I'm finished.
Oh. I thought I heard you say you
Moving
were.
right along.
2 minutes on the sideline. All right, yeah, look, just my basic view is that if the rangatira are happy, I am happy. So the recommendation's fine with that. Just a thought, I know that the recommendations involve some finesse and further consideration of the specific criteria, but I would have thought one of the criteria under 13.3, it looks at the moment, consider the time commitment for tangata whenua representatives on the RPC. I would suggest perhaps we add, including in relation to the preparation of the Kotahi plan, because there will be a whole bunch of all governors meetings that are outside the RPC meeting schedules, and goodness knows what community engagement commitments and things like that. And I think that is a factor. There's a particularly intense work stream ahead of us that should be factored into the review, I would have thought.
Thank you, councillor Williams. That was one thing that came up in our discussion. And councillor Foss?
Just a clarification, Chair, the proposed new recommendations as they appear just from the CE, and thank you for your guidance earlier, just if they're adopted as proposed, that determination question, I'm just not sure where it lands. Where we've landed, and I'm very much on board with what you said, and thanks for that offering there. But if we adopt that, then does that mean we're going to get a determination from some other body, which therefore could be interpreted as that is it, or that the language there will come through this committee and then ultimately through the council itself? I'm just not sure which way that landed, please.
So look, it is a bit ambiguous within the recommendations themselves. Hopefully it was clearer in the paper, but the staff expectation is that once strategic pay have concluded their review and made recommendations, that they would be brought back to this committee, and then this committee would then make a formal recommendation about how to act on those recommendations through the council.
Could I just add that, given the previous experience, which James has alluded to, we agreed on previous time around who was to do it. The reviewer was recommended to the council. Everybody accepted that. But when the answer came back, people were unhappy. Had it have been a determinative position, there would have been no review, no discussion, no nothing. It would simply been put up. So I think the process of having a recommendation or determination made to them and recommending up is not actually a bad one. It's a safety valve both ways. And at the end, we've all got to be happy with it. So I don't see a problem with this. As I say, when it came up last time, it was underdone, and there were some serious grumbles about it. So councillors and Rex, the chair, and James, that went through it and came up with a compromise position, which people said, well, that works for us, so we did the deal. Bang. Why? We're all going to be sensible about this. That's my view.
Thank you, and we have a response through councillor Lambert.
Just looking at that note 4, the recommendation 4,
and you quoted earlier that you might not be here. It's like, do we need to name names on who's delegated or positions?
We felt that this would happen before that
Well, March
occurred.
next year.
Yeah. Right. Because within the tangata whenua, this is my response to Councillor Lambert. I'm named up there, but this is within tangata whenua representatives, and that's a role that could easily be substituted.
That's
all
true
right?
for all of us too. And if it has to change, we just amend something.
Right. All right. And Ricky, did I hear you clear your throat?
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we need to be careful. We can't rewrite the terms of reference you can't rewrite the terms of reference in this meeting. Terms of reference can only be amended by a written agreement from the appointees, which is the council and the PSGE to appoint the tangata whenua reps to the RPC. You can't rewrite the terms of reference in this meeting.
Yes.
And I think that's what we're at risk of doing, or you're at risk of doing, because to agree something different than what the terms of reference provide at this meeting is and I'm not giving you legal advice, but I think that's ultra vires the terms of reference and the statute itself. I think you need to be very careful on what you're proposing. Be my lay advice on that matter. On that point, yeah. So.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you. Is there any further conversation? Tanya, sorry, the little red dot is tiny.
Oh, kia ora. Look, I think we can comply with the terms of reference for the RPC and help with the concerns that have been expressed today around the table. I think the suggestion that, the several people from council and from councillors and from tangata whenua look at the process and confirm the process. Obviously, it has to be consistent with the terms of reference. I think that's okay, that's constructive. I differ a little bit from Councillor Barker's view. I think it's possible for Strategic Pay to provide a draft report that goes to the council, that goes to the councillors, and that goes to the tangata whenua reps to make sure that that Strategic Pay has done the job it was asked to do, which is not what happened last time with the previous appointee. So I think that's all fine. And then once the feedback has been given by the councillors and by tangata whenua to the reviewer, Strategic Play, then they can finalise their, their determination. And I think it is a determination. However, I'm not clear on the exact process, but it would seem sensible to me that if the council is actually making the payments, then obviously councillors need to approve the determination in the sense that the determination's made, councillors accept it, and they pass a resolution saying that there would have to be some fundamental flaw in Strategic Pay's work for everybody to be up in arms. I think there's plenty of checks and balances in the terms of reference about how that is determined, and we can all have eyes over it. The one thing I would say, though, I'm stressing that it would go to the tangata whenua reps in draft, and it should go to councillors in draft for everyone to put their feedback in. It shouldn't come to the RPC technically as the RPC, because it is not the job of the RPC to determine the remuneration for the tangata whenua reps. So I think that's just a process thing. I think we should have a draft. I think both groups should have a look at it, give their feedback. Strategic Pay should take that on board and then make their determination. Then the determination should go to the councillors effectively for rubber stamping and approving in terms of payments. So I think that would be a process that helps assuage the concerns, but also complies with the terms of reference. That's what I'd like to see happen.
All right. Any further comment? Thank you, Tanya. No further comment. So can I move the recommendations to be received?
Sorry, can you just read it out so we can all be on the same page, so to speak? Because it's just been taken off the screen.
Okay, so if you can give me from the red. Oh. Do I need to read 1 and 2?
Yeah, because we need to pass it.
Yeah, but that starts at 3.
Oh, sorry.
So the recommendations are that the Regional Planning Committee receives and considers the Tangata Whenua Representatives Remuneration Review Staff Report. Agrees that the decision, number 2, agrees that the decisions to be made are not significant under the criteria contained in Council's adopted significance and engagement policy, and that Council can exercise its discretion and make decisions on this issue without conferring directly with the community or persons likely to have an interest in the decision. Number 3, agree to strategic pay being appointed as the sole appointee to undertake the independent review of a remuneration for Tangata Whenua representatives on the Regional Planning Committee, subject to agreement on the process and criteria for the review. Number 4, note the TWR have delegated responsibility to Alana Hiha and Mike Mohi to represent the Tangata Whenua representatives regarding, regarding the remuneration review. Number 5, agrees to delegate the authority to finalise the process and criteria for the Regional Planning Committee remuneration review to Councillor Rick Barker and other, or ORS,
Others,
on behalf of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Regional Planning Committee members. Alana Hiha and Mike Mohi on behalf of the Tangata Whenua representatives to the Regional Planning Committee. And then number 6, agree the remuneration of members of the Māori Committee is not a matter for the RPC and must be determined between Hawke's Bay Regional Council and members of the Māori Committee.
Could I just make one suggestion, Chair, that the 2 words Rick and Barker be deleted and replaced by Council Chair.
All right. Is that acceptable by all? Aye.
Given its
So
elections.
now to read.
Said with too much enthusiasm.
Writing myself out.
So now to read number 5, agrees to delegate the authority to finalise the process and criteria for the Regional Planning Committee remuneration review to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council Chair and RPC members Alana Hiha and Mike Mohi on behalf of the Tangata Whenua representatives to the Regional Planning Committee. So I've read number 5 through again, but can I ask for someone to move that en masse, the recommendations 1 through 6? So thank you, Laura. A seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Got it.
Yes. I was going to say Councillor Jackie, but I already made that mistake once today.
That's all right. Judge Judy.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you to Tanya Hopmans, who recommended that we actually take time to deliberate over this.
Thank you, Tanya.
I am going to, I note that fortunately number 7 was taken out of the agenda today because we're already past that time. And we're also past the time where we were going to start number 8, but I'm going to call a recess for a cup of tea, if that's all right, or no? I see all the councillors looking with shocked.
But
only beginning now.
Do you, shall we carry on?
Can we carry on?
Carry on.
All right.
I want to get out here.
Kei te haere tonu, all right.
Tell them to get up and
Go
grab
for
a
it.
coffee.
Yes, so yes, councillor Ormsby has recommended that you can make your own coffee at your own leisure and listen to the conversation and come back to your seats. All right, and thank you. It's not a kaumatua meeting.
He's did that.
All right, moving on for the sake of the kaumatua around the table. Number 8 on our agenda is the Regional Spatial Strategy and Related Matters Update, which is Gavin Ide. Can we invite you to the front?
Oh.
I don't know if we've got a camera tall enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Morena tātou. Conscious of time ticking by, so perhaps in the interest of time, because this item is an information paper to you, largely take it as read. There is, for your convenience, an executive summary in this paper. So all it is just a report to say that for a period of months, the regional leaders have been having a conversation about how might there be a more strategic approach to how the region protects things, develop things, and is all in a connected fashion. That is draped in a conversation around a regional spatial strategy, RSS, sometimes referred to as a regional spatial plan. And this paper just presents an update as to where those conversations are at. Some consultants have been commissioned to undertake a scoping report into what a regional spatial strategy process and product might entail. We're anticipating that that regional spatial strategy scoping report would be finished and presented back to all 5 councils in Hawke's Bay, presented back to them in and around November this year. So that is where we're at. Certainly the consultants that are undertaking the scoping report are in the process of just setting up some meeting invitations to interview key participants and get their sense of what the needs are for a regional spatial strategy, the process, how governance of it might look like, and various other things. Perry's involved in the conversations as well, so he's obviously got something to add.
So what Gavin won't be aware of is that on the 14th of this month, the Tangata Whenua representatives from the Regional Planning Committee also considered this paper. And as part of Ricky's response, and thank you again, Ricky, you sent us a copy of your commentary in regards to this paper yesterday. So I'll just reiterate the apology that that hasn't been circulated widely because it was only received yesterday. So the comments, I'll probably refer back through you, Chair, that Ricky may wish to sort of just summarise the comments that are in there. But can I say at the outset that myself, Katrina Brunton, Gavin and who else? Gary, quite a few of us from the council have been involved in these discussions. In particular, over the last 2 or 3 months, they've been very much focused around the future development strategy, which is across both Ahuriri and across Heretonga. Each of the Māori partnership components of each of the 5 councils are participating in those discussions. It is anticipated at some point when we return back into the regional spatial strategy that this will be consulted back with this committee and all the PSGs that compose the Regional Planning Committee. So through you, Chair, perhaps Ricky may want to add some commentary from the paper that he presented.
He may or he may not want to, but we're going to invite him to do so because we did have a considered discussion, not about the nuts and bolts of everything we see in this paper, but more in the area of governance of RSS compared with the implications of RMA reforms that are coming up. So for everyone else's sake, can I invite you, Ricky, to speak to this?
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thanks, Judy. I want to acknowledge that you and your equivalents in the other councils have been involved, which is great. I guess the concern is your council employees and you're not tangata whenua representatives. So there's been to date no direct engagement from tangata whenua in this process that the tangata whenua representatives were aware of. That's not to say that spatial planning is a bad thing. I think, well, certainly from my perspective, spatial planning is a very good thing. It's more the timing and the fact that tangata whenua haven't been directly involved in the development as to stand, whether those are existing future directions, frameworks or otherwise. The fact that tangata whenua haven't been involved is a little bit problematic, or largely very problematic, I guess, from the perspective of tangata whenua representatives, that these are critical processes and they would have expected to be at the table from the outset. I know I'm not sure how well understood the Spatial Planning Act, Natural Built Environments Act processes are understood around the table at the moment. Those are the reforms that will replace intended to replace the RMA. As part of those processes, the proposed processes, engaging with tangata whenua is front and centre of those proposals. And if we're going to do this process pre those reforms, then I think we should be doing our best to make sure that we are engaging tangata whenua from the outset as best we can. Acknowledging that back in February, when there was a discussion around regional spatial strategies at the RPC, I think tangata whenua representatives at that point indicated they weren't particularly supportive of progressing at this time because they just had so much on, including with the Kotahi plan change coming up as well. Resources were already stretched, so to add another quite significant project of a regional spatial strategy onto the table was going to be a stretch for tangata whenua reps with current resourcing. So I guess the recommendations in the paper, that there's urgent engagement with the HBRC and the wider working group on the development of the RSS and in terms of tangata whenua involvement, around the timing, how tangata whenua are involved, and I think tangata whenua need to have a conversation amongst themselves about how they do that. Does everybody want to be sitting at the table, or do they want to look at establishing a committee of some description or a subgroup to work on this collectively? How that will be resourced and funded, what that support and resourcing will be and where it comes from, and also the role of the RPC and the overall governance of the regional spatial strategy process. At the moment, regional spatial strategy, as I'm sure we're aware, generally involves all of the councils, which it appears from this paper there's some form of governance group, working group, who are overseeing it. How does the RPC, as it stands now, fit into that process? And I'm aware there's some discussions with, I think it's been wider than the PSGs, but both with the settled iwi groups from whose settlements the RPC originated. The Crown has an obligation to engage with them in any legislative changes to make sure the existing arrangements, including the RPC, are carried forward into any new RMA reforms or RMA replacements. Those existing provisions have to be carried forward. If they don't, the Crown is breaching existing contracts they've reached with those iwi. So consideration needs to be given about how the RPC, because it's a settlement redress, how that will fit in with this RSS process. I guess those are the key issues from our perspective, from the tangata whenua reps around meeting last week.
All right,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ricky. And in response, the CE?
Thank you, Chair. So, look, all the points that Ricky's raised are valid and important and are understood. What the paper probably doesn't convey as well as it could is the genesis of this work, which is not the RM reforms. It is the very real issues being currently experienced in Hiritonga, with the growth and demand of housing supply that's running headlong into our high-value productive land and issues around natural hazard management, with housing developments being increasingly proposed in places that have challenges in the longer to medium term from things like climate change. And so the Hastings District Council and Napier City Council in the last couple of years have become increasingly concerned about their ability to manage the development pressure that's currently happening in Hiritonga. That sits alongside the concerns that the Regional Council has about how that pressure on housing supply and associated industry and economic growth is running headlong into our natural resource environment, particularly the freshwater availability for Hiritonga as well. Overlaying that are concerns about our transport infrastructure and Crown infrastructure across social housing, education, and potentially into healthcare as well. What we have collectively observed across 5 councils and has concerned the 5 chief executives in discussion with our mayors and chair has been that Te Matua Māori has gone through an extraordinary period of economic growth and prosperity in the last particularly 6 to 7 years. There has been a lot of inward migration into the region. There's a lot proposed by way of increased housing supply, including that for the retirement sector. There is a lot of growth pressure on our region, and our planning instruments are woefully inadequate for managing all of that. Now, we're playing catch up with respect to kotahi, but kotahi advances the regional council's functions, but doesn't align and embed those with the district council. So we were having these conversations before central government announced the RM reform package, and we were looking at how we took the HPUD's urban development strategy and how we would weave together our planning instruments as a region to deal with all of those pressures of growth and the pressures on our environment and our natural hazard landscape substantially changing. Along comes over the top of that a national policy statement on urban development that requires a future development strategy for Napier Hastings and the Regional Council to develop. And then over the top of that comes the resource management reforms and the government indicating the shift to regional spatial strategies, to which we across the council said, great, help is on the way by way of legislative reform, but actually we have a burning platform that our region is standing on now. So what we were attempting to do is try and bring this all together, and at the very, very outset we recognised that everything done in this space must be done in partnership with mana whenua, and we recognise that everybody's got a lot on right now, and capability and capacity is the biggest issue facing particularly mana whenua, but our broader community as well. So we've attempted to reflect in this paper, and again, possibly it isn't clear enough, that we've sort of hauled on the brakes, if you like, of all this activity to enable time to have conversations with our mana whenua. And so with our Te Kupenga group, we have been discussing the centrality of this to all of our mahi over the next few years. There have been parallel attempts to engage Māori committee, advisory committees for each of the councils, bring this to all governors. It's here today at this table to start that conversation. And the single most repetitive and simple thing we have said to the Crown on all of this is that none of this can be achieved without funding for the capability and capacity of our mana whenua, and we recognise that the Crown has appropriated significant funding to vote environment for the implementation of the reforms, and that we would like to see substantial funding for mana whenua participation and for the development of long-term capability and capacity so that we can co-develop our region's future under this framework. So, look, it's really messy. There are all these moving parts, which Ricky has eloquently described, that are all happening here. And I just wanted to reassure this committee that we understand how central the role of this committee in particular must be to all of it. But the reforms, as you all know, challenge the nature of what currently exists in the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee Act 2015, the role of this committee, which was quite tidy, sat inside the functions of regional councils. But our future as a region, environmentally, economically, socially, demands that we actually integrate the planning of our towns, our transport networks, our infrastructure with our natural environment, and this is done with a long-term focus on growth, but also long-term focus on climate change and the pressures we face. So the real challenge for this committee is how it's going to work within an increasingly integrated but quite complex framework. And so this conversation is enormously important, I think, particularly as Council steps into its next triennium. And we really were hoping for some good discussion today about your views about how to navigate all of this. There's not some tidy prescription or agenda or solution here. This is the beginning, I think, of quite a big conversation with mana whenua between local government, not just this council, but the 5 councils of the Rohi. So hopefully that provides a bit more context for you all.
Thank you, James. And I see that there are hands up. Can I start with Councillor Williams?
Thank you. Look, thank you, Ricky and James, and also Gavin for the paper. I just wanted to share this observation that we haven't really even cleared our throat on this exercise. This is the ground floor, actually. So the fact that there hasn't been tangata whenua participation in the development of a spatial plan is not a misstep in my view. There hasn't been a step taken. And this is the very embryonic conversation that we're having even prior to the point of gestation. So I just wanted to also, I guess, make a plug for just how important this exercise is for all of the reasons James shared. It says in the paper, paragraph 31, that the Kotahi plan would be a building block of the regional spatial strategy. I actually think it's the other way around. The regional spatial strategy actually will sit over the top of the Kotahi plan, and in that regard, we're out of sequence. We are simply not going to be able to achieve our ambition of the net zero carbon region or be protected from coastal hazards or flooding and inundation or tsunami risk or clear of the versatile plains and protect our water and aquifers and at the same time have an economy and people and jobs and growth and a future if we don't get this regional spatial plan right. It's absolutely pivotal. We had a meeting, a really productive meeting, which Charlie attended and Michelle McElroy was there, along with some of the councillors, with Minister Parker recently. And, you know, I think he really did see just how well we were operating now as a cohesive team. And I think that gives us, you know, this all governors approach, a very strong chance of being one of the candidates to pilot a regional spatial strategy. That's obviously a decision yet to be made, but he did indicate that, you know, they were looking at one in the North Island, a unitary authority, one in the South Island, and I think that leaves a space for us to be the one in the North Island. Equally, as I shared with him, we're not a place that's made all the mistakes as yet, so we haven't got all these legacy inheritances. We can actually design our future. And so I think that in some ways addresses in part the resourcing issues. If we have our act together, we can be well enough resourced to do this alongside and in front of, in fact, the challenges of the Kotahi plan. And I just noted, you know, we've also got to bear in mind the realities that there is a planning committee structure coming at us like a bullet train. And you know, if we don't have our act together and show a proactive approach on this, you know, you could see it all kicked off to a sort of planning committee structure. So I really do think we need to be on top of this. We need to be supportive. We need to get into it. And I just note in closing the paper does recommend paragraphs 24 and 25 iwi Māori input into the scoping exercise right from the beginning, and I assume that the scoping exercise would, in and of itself, help position us for the funding bid to central government as a pilot region. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Pierre had his hand, and then after you, Tanya.
Thank you, Chair, because I appreciate I'm not actually an RPC member, but a member of staff, but I appreciate. Just to add that the initial meeting, which is an introductory meeting for this, was actually held across all 5 councils with an invitation widely to tangata whenua on the 15th of October last year. Regrettably, that was a clash with you'll recall, our Green Shed day out at East Pier, our all of Governor's first hui. So that was a bit of a clash and regrettable. And James has mentioned Te Kupinga, which are me and my equivalent across each of the five councils. Our role in that was just to get into those initial discussions to ensure that tangata whenua, mana whenua, had placement within whichever process was going to unfold, both around the future development strategy, FDS, and also about the regional spatial strategy. The key point I'm taking from your feedback in the paper that Ricky has presented is that you want to be involved now. And so what we'll do is we'll take that back, both Katrina and I, on behalf of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, directly back to that coordinating and governing group. Tēnā koe, Chair.
Kia ora. Thank you. And Tanya.
Kia ora. I know it's not on the agenda for this hui, but I am interested to understand what the position of council and councillors is in relation to the proposed planning committee, because I guess that's really at the heart of these reforms and understanding what our future role is going to look like. I know that Darren Ponter, he has already met with the PSGEs and others, and also met with council. So are we able to have a little bit of that discussion, because it would be helpful to know what the position of the councillors is?
Could I just answer that? It's true that we have met with Darren Ponter, but councillors have not taken a position on this. This is a matter really for, I think at this stage, for the Minister to make his decision. What we have been told by the Minister when we met with him in Wellington was that as a priority commitment from him, that the existing commitments that the Crown has made in the planning space, for example, the Regional Planning Committee and others, will be maintained or will not be diminished or lessened in any way. That being the case, we've got that assured. But whether in fact it means that these entities expanded capability is going to be a decision for the Minister. Councillors have not taken that to the community, have not decided on that, so it's simply left there as neutral at this stage.
Chair, could I perhaps just add to that we have had an exchange with Mr Ponter in the last week in which he's indicated an intention to meet with us all collectively between the PSGs and Council and himself in the next stage of his work. So
good. Yep.
Right, thank you. Are there any other comments? I see that Tanya will respond to these two comments. Thank you, Tanya.
Oh, okay. Look, I know that the council has said that it supports the role of the RPC in maintaining the RPC as, I guess, the key, a key part of the decision making in our region. And I think there is an opportunity for councillors and tangata whenua, and I appreciate the position that councillors are in, but nonetheless, I think the work will continue regardless of who's around the table, in a couple of months' time. These are issues we're going to have to deal with. I think the PSGEs did put forward a proposal to Darren to consider. I just wasn't sure if he'd shared it with yourselves, that's all. If not, then we can hold fire, because amongst the PSGs we haven't talked about discussing it with council, but we certainly have discussed it with Darren.
my view is the next step would probably be waiting for Darren to call a meeting of everybody together, hear that jointly, and then if we need to have a further discussion, we'll have a further discussion. I don't think there's any point us trying to preempt that at this stage. With a limited
Yes.
time.
That's right, and from my point of view, thank you, councillor Barker, it's a bit of a hot potato to drop on the councillors around the table for right now,
We haven't had that conversation.
when you haven't looked at this with that in mind.
Thank you, Chair.
Because I think sometimes we need to consider the lenses that we're reading our papers through. And my first reading of this paper was to do with coastal environment, sustainable, spatial strategies. But then we had our hui last week and it was a very different lens. So is that all right around the table? Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, if I can just add it, we realise that the council here, we're also part of the Crown, so the negotiation is really between the RPC and the Crown at this point, because they have to go out to all the treaty groups that are out there in the country, and our program is getting pulled into the wider mix. So
thank you.
We're really going to follow the RPC and what they end up with, and we've made it clear to Parker that we're willing to put the RPC up as an example for the rest.
Right.
Can I perhaps add some clarity into where we're at with the national level reforms, Madam Chair? So the RPC, as you'll know, is a result of a treaty settlement redress with the ridging of Pahuera, and then I think included Mangahariru Tangatu. That won't. What the government has committed to is not undoing existing redress. And what will happen will be there'll be a preservation clause in the NBA and the SPA that says whatever this act does, it cannot detrimentally impact existing settlement arrangements, but will give a 2-year window for the Crown and those PSGEs to renegotiate those settlements. Not renegotiate the settlement, but negotiate how those existing arrangements are carried through into the new legislation. So there'll be a 2-year window effectively to do that. That's not, certainly in my perspective, that is not a conversation between the council and the Crown. That's a conversation between Pahuera and Mangahariru with the Crown about how their settlement redress is preserved into the new legislation. Similarly, as that will happen with Ngāi Tahu and Waikato Tainui and every other iwi around the country, and that's going to be a long process. Problem is, we told them, or the freshwater iwi leaders, or the Pautau iwi leaders group told them 3 years ago they needed to do this then. They've done nothing until now. Now they're panicking and having to put in a preservation clause in the legislation because they didn't do what they should have done 3 years ago. Now we've got 2 years to do it into the future. A little bit difficult, and that'll create problems for everybody, including the RPC, I think. But ultimately, I think there's enough goodwill around the table to carry that through in that period of uncertainty that the government's created. But if I think my view is we just carry on doing what we're doing, the way we've been doing it. With goodwill, we'll get there. But the negotiation will be between those PSGEs and the Crown ultimately.
Right. Thank you, Ricky. Any other comments? So I'm happy to move that we accept this update.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Seconded by. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Chair?
Oh, yes, sorry.
No, we're past that point in regards to that paper. But me he tai rangatira kei wanginui a tātou, ka tika kami. So I'm just acknowledging that he rangatira katoa koutou, each of you. But when someone of such status arrives in amongst us, then sometimes it's good to revert back to tikanga and to acknowledge. Hoi anō ko tāku tēnei mihi kia koe rā, e te pāpā e karauna. Ka tai mai rā, hene uru tapu, hene uru mana, hene uru tangata. Nau nei whiri ai te iwi, kia tai whakakiki mai tēnei tūru maratau. Nō reira, anei au i te taha o tēnei tō tātou nei tiamana me ki a ngā rangatira kāre kai tu atu e mihi kia koe. Nō reira, nau mai hoki mai ki tō tūru mo tō iwi. Nau mai hoki mai me ki ranga āhuatanga kai rungi o pokohiwi. Kua mihia, kua tangihia. Hoi ana o te rangatira, tēnei au, tēnei tātou e mihi. Tēnā koe, nau mai hoki mai.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Aroha mai.
Kia ora tātou e hui mai roto tēnei whare, ngā mihi nui tā tātou hara mai i te koronga koro mō tēnei hui. Just glad to be back here.
Aye.
Sharing all what's happening in regards to our region. I've been given a green light now, so back. We had a hui last week with our iwi in regards to, because we're in the transitional stages now where we're having our voting for trustees on the board. So we're in that process at the moment. I've been trying to catch up with everything, but getting there. So, kia ora tātou.
Kia ora koe. All right. So, kei te haere tonu ki number 9. Right.
Kerry and Nicola.
Kerry and Nicola, thank you. Kerry Brunton and Nicola.
Kerry Edmonds.
Kerry Edmonds and Nicola.
Go up to page. Oh. Yeah. And I keep going up and down.
Welcome.
But I reload.
Kia ora.
Download it.
Kotahi Community Drop-in Sessions.
So Nicola's just bringing up a wee presentation that she's whipped up. So, morena tātou. This is really just a quick verbal update just to let you know, for those of you who haven't been able to attend any of our drop-in sessions, how well they've been going. We've so far held, as you can see, 13.
No, we've got.
We've got 13 events. We haven't held all of them yet. We've got four left. We've had, I would say, at the majority of our events, really positive, successful engagement. We've had a number of those on marae, and they've actually been very well received. And obviously, we hold fairly different processes there. It's not so much a drop-in. We've had pōhere, and then, introductions of who we are, and then, stepping through why we're here. And we had a lovely one up in Waihua, didn't we, Teresa? Which was very well attended, and lots and lots of questions and engagement. And so we're actually finding probably that the community-focused events are much better than, or have been better attended and better received than the sort of typical drop-in sessions.
You mean the town hall sessions? Town hall sessions, sorry.
We've had a number of events up and down the region. Nicola's had a couple of, she's got one tomorrow night in Tūtera. We've had one yesterday over at the War Memorial. We've had, like I say, Waihua Marae, Parangahau, at Tai Whenua up in Wairoa, Nuhaka Marae. Gosh. Tepuhui. Yes, so we're getting ourselves out there. We would have probably between, I don't know, maybe around averaging about 15 people at each of those events, which probably by most people's standards doesn't sound like a lot of people, but we're getting really rich feedback, really, having really good conversations, one-on-one conversations, where we're really having that opportunity to listen to what are the issues, what are the local issues, what's important to people locally, and like I say, those real community-focused events, we're really finding that where place matters to people, that's where we're really getting the gold. Matilda, did you want to add anything?
I'd just say that we've had a number of invitations from groups from those drop-in sessions. So, for example, I was invited to speak to the Eskia River group, and that's given us another level of engagement and really kind of people that are so enthusiastic to share their information and their values and their visions with us. So it's been a good way to make those connections into the community as well. And then yes, it shows up better up here. So running alongside our community drop-in sessions, we've also had a social media campaign running, and part of that has been our social pinpoint. So this is an online tool where you can drop a pin with whichever topic you want. We've currently got about 47 responses sitting in there, and the quality of the responses that we've had is really good. So this is probably capturing those people that might not come along to an in-person event, but they are scrolling their phones, they see the ads pop up, they see the social media posts, and they're leaving some really detailed feedback, which is awesome. And alongside that, we've had a social media campaign, which our comms team have developed alongside us, called Let's Talk. We've had a go at using the polls on Instagram, and so they've been really neat. We've got some really kind of immediate feedback and other people can see. So there's a series of polls that will roll out across the topics. And we have had some feedback through our social media, so just our Facebook posts as well. So that's being potentially an area that maybe we didn't initially consider we'd get a lot of feedback from, but we've gathered some good data from those as well. So just trying to connect with all the different parts of the communities in the way that they want to kind of give us that information. So that's been really positive. And then this is kind of a little bit of what the next step will start to look like. So currently from the events that we've held, and not including all of the social media and social pinpoint, we've got about 550 data points. So that's a process of us going through and doing some thematic analysis, which is just a way of looking at how we interpret what we've got, where it belongs in terms of catchments, how we look at it in relation to topics, and how we start to pull together the narratives and the stories around the issues that we're hearing. And then just at the bottom there, we've got a word cloud, which I believe, did we take to Te Pahui? We took some word clouds, but just that idea of how we're going to report these issues back to our community as well, and kind of being able to take them along that journey of what we've found out, rather than just a straight report with a lot of words. So yeah.
The feedback that we're getting from people at these events is that they've really appreciated the opportunity to talk to us. They're really grateful that we've actually come to their part of the community, and the fact that we're not just standing up at the front of a room giving a presentation and then walking away, that we're actually really connecting with people. And we've also found that what it's doing too is bringing to the fore a lot of issues that we can then pass on to other teams, particularly our compliance team. We've had a few interesting stories come through these conversations about issues happening out in the environment, and so we've been able to follow up with our compliance team, and then they're following up and taking some action there, which is really good news, and it's a good closing of the loop for people, so they are being heard. And I'm also very grateful to you all for those of you who've been able to attend the events, and also to the Māori Committee, and also for rallying around your communities to have people turn up as well. I think that's been excellent. So thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I commend you and your teams for what you've already done. Really loving that Let's Talk. I think that looks like a great idea. Something we talked about at the last Katahi drop-in was about, instead of people coming to you, we go to the people. And I really think that's such a brilliant idea to perhaps have a little bit more physical presence in the community, like the farmers market, or a particular event that might be on. If you look up, what's on and what community event may be on, and you can actually have a stand or a stall there, which I think would be really amazing. But what I really like about what you've just briefed us on is just raising that presence of regional council in the community. So that example of bringing compliance issues to the table, that's fantastic, because that's just showing, that people are not sure who to go speak to or whatever. So, you're actually becoming a lot more present. I think that's excellent for the organisation. So well done. And hopefully we'll see a little bit more stalls in the community with kotahi, for kotahi.
Just probably a point to mention on that, which we didn't mention, was we are going to be part of the display at the AMP show, so and kotahi will be part of that. So overall, the branding is around HBRC and getting that kind of what we do out into the community, but kotahi will be a part of that to take that feedback as well. So.
Well done.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? No? Wow, thank you.
Ooh, wow.
I recommend we receive that report.
Well
An
done.
update.
We can
Well, I'm moving that we receive. Is there anyone? Thank you, Kerry. And those in favour?
Aye.
I thank you, Kerry. Right. Moving on to tank.
Oh, I think we saved it up for this.
Katrina and
Stop it.
oh, Kerry,
Marianne. Yes.
All right.
So, thank you. You will have all seen that the tank decision was released on Friday last week, and that is a significant milestone for this organisation and for the region. Just to wind back a little bit, it's probably worth reflecting on the journey that we've been on. Tank did start in 2012. Neither Marianne or I were there at the beginning. I was going to say, Jerif was there, Councillor Van Beek. It has been a long process, and I think that was acknowledged by the commissioners. We had 5 independent commissioners who considered the plan change. Many of them probably familiar to you. We had Brent Cowie, Raudu Kirikiri, Dr. Roger Marker, Antoine Coffin, who was our chair, and Dr. Greg Ryder. And so that was a very experienced panel who were chosen by this committee, and they were given the delegated authority to make the decision on the plan change. And so they have considered the 6,000 plus points of submissions. And again, I'd like to thank all the submitters who were involved in making submissions and took the time to come to the hearings. Laura was one of those submitters. And we did have 3 weeks of hearings, so there was a lot for the panel to consider. We had our first week at Mangaroa Marae, and that was a great week for everybody, and a wonderful experience for this organisation, because that was the first time we've had a plan change heard on Marae, so that was excellent. I'd like to thank all of the people who have been involved since 2012, because, like I say, for us, we haven't been here all of that time, but some people have been there right from the start, and they're out in the community, and they've done a lot of hard work in keeping in touch with what's been going on with this plan change. And I'm sure there will be very many people who are eager to have received the decision, submitters and others alike, and who will be interested in the outcome of that. So, yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
Thank you.
And I'd love to thank Marianne for all of her hard work getting us to this point.
It was a big team.
It was a big team. So we circulated some highlights to you all last week, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to read those, because as you can see, the decision in itself, plus all of the appendices, is not insignificant. It's some very heavy reading, I would say. The decision was around 250 pages, and then added to that all the appendices. So it is a big document, and the commissioners did say in their summary pages that this is the most complex plan change that they have ever considered, and they are experienced professionals who have been doing this work for a long time. So it was a big job for them. So the highlights, I suppose, for the purpose of this meeting, which aren't dissimilar to what I circulated to you all, in that the commissioners have not moved away from the position that was in the proposed plan change around the 90 cubic million interim allocation limit for the aquifer. So what that means for our community is that there will be an application of actual and reasonable for anybody looking to replace their current consent. So there will be, quite significant impacts on water users, and it does cement the fact that the aquifer, the water within the aquifer is limited and there is no more available. So what we need to understand is that actually of those current consents, some of them have, within their consents, they have been over allocated water and they're not actually using that amount of water that is within their current consent. So there will be that ability to use the word claw back to what is deemed actual and reasonable, because we need to look after the water that's within the aquifer. Some of the other key highlights there is that the commissioners supported the minimum flows which were within the proposed plan change. One of the main changes probably that they made, some of the key changes were around the bans for the attribute states. They felt that some of the aspirational targets that had been put forward by the tank stakeholder group were too aspirational to be realistic as a target. So they sought to bring those back to more closely align with what was within the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. Did you want to add anything further? I mean, there is a number of other things, but they're probably the key highlights for me, but they may not be the key highlights for you. So we are here to take any questions.
Yes, I see that hand. Councillor Voss.
Can I just thank and congratulate everyone that's been involved working to this point? There still may be some issues, obviously, but heart and souls have been in this for quite some time and long before many of us around the council came on. James, is there anything you can add? What does it look like next for the council? There's two scenarios here. One, a judicial process follows. So if that's the case, everything's still on pause. If there's not, what does it mean for the allocation of resources of the council? We're going to get a whole lot busier doing X, Y, Z, or et cetera, because I'm sure some pressures are going to come on, some decisions have to be made, et cetera, et cetera.
In anticipation of this plan becoming operative, we have increased our level of resourcing across teams, particularly in policy and regulation and in integrated catchment management. We have got ahead of the plan in areas that I guess are non-controversial and are not dependent on regulation, particularly working with catchment collectives in the greater tank catchments, and we have had resourcing approved by council in the current long-term plan period to work more closely with those communities, and I'm pleased to report that work's going exceptionally well. And we heard a message through the tank group itself that our rural communities didn't want to wait for a plan to become operative. They wanted to get on and start dealing with the issues that we all know need to be addressed, and so that has gone well. The plan does require an even greater level of effort in that regard, and so particularly around our irrigation community on the Here Tonga Plains, and there will need to be some further evaluation of the resourcing capacity and capability between ourselves and also industry, looking when we reflect on the work that we've done in partnership with the Twyford Irrigators Collective, what's evident there is that the irrigation community itself provided significant and continues to provide a significant amount of resourcing. So there's a bit of working through to do, I think, about the division of labour between council and our rural communities in that regard. So we've really, the short story on that is we've started down the journey. We have some resourcing. With the decisions of the commissioners, we will need to evaluate whether they remain sufficient. The other big area of activity is in the resource consenting space, and we've had some hundreds of consents on hold pending the decision of commissioners. We will now move to processing those consents, and we have to some extent anticipated that volume, but we can't magic away what is a bow wave of consenting activity. There has been some tools developed to enable the consenting to happen in an efficient manner, and we currently have a collaboration getting underway between our policy and planning team and our consenting team to help with the burden, and that gives our policy and planning team some exposure to the consenting process and enables I guess the silos of council to be broken down in an all hands to the pump team effort to try and get those consents through as quickly as possible and provide our water users with certainty. So we're on the case in terms of implementation now. We're not waiting for the ink to dry, but also being mindful of the fact that that we may well have appeals, but that doesn't need to stop council's implementation work.
Thanks very much, and just personal thanks to you and your leadership team who've been on this journey in various roles over the years. Just thanks so much for all you've done so far.
Thank you.
Space. Appreciate it.
Right, and Councillor Williams, then Councillor Van Beek.
Madam Chair, I was really wanting to make a comment in line with Councillor Foss's comment. If it was Speaker at this stage, it really, the way I see it, the decision has upheld the fabric or the bones, if not a lot of the meat, of the tank through the 10-year preceding process, and I think that that's an absolute tribute to the legacy of all stakeholders involved over that 10 years, but perhaps as much as anyone, the effort that the staff made during an absolutely frenetic process leading into that hearing of providing helpful reporting to the commissioners around the 6,000, was it, submission points. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. I just want to make, I guess, a plea and a plug to our communities, and picking up on a letter, a most excellent letter, I thought, from Zan Harding to the paper this morning, that this represents a real stake in the ground. It may not be perfect, it may not be what everyone wants, it may be a major disappointment to some people in some respects, but if we all strive for perfection on every aspect of water management at all times, we're going to go nowhere. And this locks in for the first time a definitive allocation ceiling, a definitive allocation framework, a priority for the environment, a comprehensive stormwater management system for our urban catchments as much as our rural ones for the first time, and a comprehensive framework that is a touchstone for Kotahi to work and improve from. And so if the communities if everyone in the community that submitted decides that because they didn't get 100% of what they wanted, they're going to appeal, no one will win from that. Our ratepayers won't win from that, our awa won't win from that, and nor will our aquifers. So I'm actually imploring, in line with what Zan Harding said, can everyone just seriously pause and consider and think, are we not best to lock in what's there and work from there under Kotahi, bearing in mind that if no one is entirely happy with this decision, it's probably about right.
Thank you. Councillor Van Beek.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm more often, you ask for questions, so I'll start off with a question because otherwise I'll get myself into trouble again, like I often do, because I make comments rather than asking questions. So my question actually is going to be the framework of actual and reasonable. How are we going to apply that and who's going to be involved in that? So that's my question, but first and foremost, I was there 12 years ago, and as a green policy person, and I'm still very much green, I was in awe with the approach that was taken by this council. You know, we were front leading, and once again, this decision proves how well ahead we were of the rest of the country in thinking this through a stakeholder policy and a stakeholder group. And the staff stayed true to that objective from day one, even to the point when the wheels were starting to fall off, but the staff stayed true. And the result is a vindication of the work that they have undertaken and their dedication to your staff, James, Marianne, Siri, and others as well. And I hope that some people who at some point, even some of the councillors, poo-pooed the process that we had undertaken and the money that was spent and it was a waste of time, I hope that we're going to see some apologies from those people, because you put our staff to the ringer. They worked very hard for what they were asked to do, and they were given a hard time. And I would like to see some apologies and hear some apologies, even from people who are not here, because this is a very good outcome, and this is right. We're not all happy about this. You never will be, but we are so close that we should link arms and start working on this, because it's important for our community and for our environment most of all. James talked about the TWIFA group. I'm the chair of the irrigators there, and we actually have annually we actually dig deep into our pockets to pull money out to improve the environment, but also to actually take some of the water that we could use for our crops, we actually give back to the environment. That's such a good example, and I think the commissioners actually have seen that, because the staff have explained how that actually will work right across, not just only in the Twyford area, but right across. So once again, thank you very much.
Right, and thank you, and Councillor Lambert, then Councillor Barker.
But I don't know, rain on anyone's parade, but I remember back about that time in the events leading up to it, that the people around Bridgepro actually run out of water because their wells weren't deep enough, and the aquifer was, at that time I couldn't believe that the regional council could over-allocate an aquifer, but I didn't know how much was in there. That's what it was telling me, and I think that was one of the times when I thought I might be a councillor. But and at the time, Teresa and I were running around looking for some water for Ropunga, and we decided that, yeah, based on what was going on, that we wouldn't take bore water, we would actually use surface water, because that's always been the tikanga, to take what's God given, not what's not rip into the earth and take out of the papatuanuku. So yeah, so I think the highlights that Kerry brought up are really, thank you very much. That's really cool that we now have a limit on the aquifer. Can't just go help yourself. And at that time, all the pictures were out there about the kāre where they were running dry. Yeah, so, and Hastings Council had to go to the rescue with water stations and those sorts of things. So, no, I think that's what it's all about for me.
Right, kia ora. So we've heard two totally different responses from different parts of the region, but both effective for their communities, and I commend you both. Councillor Barker.
I think I'm going to take my cue from Councillor Williams and not bother with the question and just go straight to a couple of comments.
I'll get told off for that.
I'll be up for it. Look, I want firstly think we just need to reflect on this. Has been a long journey. I haven't been on it for 12 years like Councillor Van Beek, but I've been on it for 9. And like he, when I first came on it, I thought this was actually quite a really exciting prospect. I had never seen anything like it before. Widespread community engagement, free and frank sharing of views, people changing views and shifting and trying to drag the community along with it. And I thought it had great prospects of working, but it didn't. In the end, we got ourselves bogged down on litigation. And I pick up on the point that Councillor Williams made. We have to find a better way of resolving these differences and getting to a point where we can all agree to move forward. That's the key to this, because if we don't, and we resort to commissioners and the courts, well, we're hung on for a long time. And so we have to look for a better way, and that's what we're doing with Kotahi. And I think this is this is one of the things that we have got out of Tank, is looking for other ways of doing things which we can take the best of Tank, which is taking the community along with us. We've heard before, with wonderful meetings in the community, people sharing ideas. But at the end, we also have to accept that we are going to have compromises here to get a deal at the end of it. Because no one is going to get everything they want. That's not the nature of life. We have to work through with the best way forward. And because the environment is the key to our sustaining our future. And we can't put that on hold while we litigate differences. We have to go forward with what best we can. And I'm very optimistic about the future because for once I think I can say safely that there's no disagreement about what we need to do. We need to better protect our waters. We need to do all of these things. We need to accept that our water resources are finite. There's not limitless water. We have to look at better ways of being more efficient with our water, more effective with our water, and we need to take much better care of the environment. That's agreed. What isn't agreed quite yet is the speed and the consequences of the change. But we're agreed on the direction, which is a really good thing. So I think Tank is here. And to answer in part one of the questions by Councillor Van Beek, actual and reasonable. Well, the first half is really simple. Actual. Every well is now monitored and people know what the actual is. What happens at the end if there's something that's outside of the norm? Well, then people then start to have to make a calculation about what is reasonable. And that will be a judgment. But I just think the simplest part, that 99% of all consents will be dealt with on the actual part. And I think that'll be fine. I'm very positive about the future, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. And down the end there, yes.
I think I need a haircut.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I quite like in this time to when Tukitook Plan Change 6 came out, although quite different reactions. So quite an outcry, I remember at the time, and just thinking to what Councillor Barker was just saying then, I don't think people were ready for the direction at that time. But, what are we, I think it's 7 years on from that plan becoming operative, and the world hasn't fallen apart down there. And I think everyone has now got on board with that direction. And if there was any criticism, probably still just the speed of change. And so, so far it's been good to see. I think this has been pretty well received as the best outcome for everything in balance so far. So that's good.
Thank you. So, not looking for any more comments. Then I suggest that we receive this report.
I'll move that.
You will. So, moved by Councillor Barker, seconded by Councillor Van Beek. Oh.
That's Jeff.
Yes, I'm looking over this side of the room simply because they were all the speakers, because they haven't seen lunch arrive. And this side of the room are being guided by the nearness to the end that we have become. So thank you. Those comments were all welcomed and the report was great. Thank you very much. Right. So moving on to number 11, the policy projects update.
Still have Kerry for this.
Yes, thank you, Kerry.
And I apologise, I haven't got my laptop in front of me. In terms of the other major updates for you, we are still waiting on a decision for the water conservation order. Unfortunately, we have heard nothing on that front whatsoever, and I have checked in with some other parties to the water conservation order, and we are not on our own in that respect. So that still sits with the judges and the commissioners to make their decision and actually let us know what the outcome is. So as soon as we know, we will let you know. Outstanding water bodies, we're still in mediation on outstanding water bodies. So I'm not able to give you any details on that. That's all without prejudice conversations at this stage. So we will just have to wait until we get to the next phase to give you any major updates on that. And I'm just trying to think what else we have on here. Sorry, I've just managed to fire up my computer. I think that's essentially it, because we're giving you the update on tank. Mohaka, so that's still sitting there as a separate line item, and actually, as you're probably all very well aware, that is part of kotahi. So I think what we'll do for the next paper is withdraw that from that item as a separate item, and we'll fold that into kotahi where it rightly fits. But we are still working very closely with the team there. We're having fortnightly meetings with Bonnie Hartami and Kate MacArthur, and oftentimes Catherine Gale, who is employed by Ngāti Pāhuera, and she is a young, fabulous lady who has a science background and is deeply involved in mātauranga, and is being mentored by Cookie Green. So that's quite exciting to have her work with us in that space. Perhaps if there are any questions on the paper, but I think it's largely taken as read otherwise. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so do I move that, or that we take that paper as read?
Yep.
Yes. And seconded by Councillor Lambert. Aye.
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 Thank you. Carried. And then the final item, because we had no minor matters, will be the September 2022 Statutory Advocacy Update, which I have down provided by Gavin Ide.
So
Gavin's here, or Kerry can answer to
I was going to say, if you have any specific questions, Gavin's probably your man for this one, but as we always do, we highlight the changes from the previous paper where we've had updates in red there. So the key ones are around managing our wetlands in the coastal marine area, and the national policy statement regs for freshwater management and Indigenous biodiversity, I think, just skimming through, yes. So if there were any specific questions on that, I can call Gavin up.
I have a
Or
question.
can find a microphone.
Right, we have a question from Kerry.
I was just wanting to know, with the one for managing the wetlands and MFE's preferred approach to not including natural wetlands in coastal areas, I just wanted to know how that affects areas like ours that do have coastal wetlands there. What's the impact of that for us?
Gavin, do you want to? Yeah.
Good question.
Okay.
Again. So with this being a proposed amendment to a national environmental regulation, the implications would be across the whole country. How that plays out in particular places would depend on, the MFE's preferred approach is to simply clarify and re-describe the National Environmental Standard for freshwater as only applying to freshwater, not saline coastal water. To do that, there would be an exclusion of wetlands that happen to be marine or coastal wetlands. It would only apply to inland wetlands, freshwater wetlands.
So is there somewhere in that change that those would move to?
So there is no equivalent national standard for coastal wetlands or marine wetlands, but we do already have a national policy statement equivalent called the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement that has certain directives about how coastal resources ought to be managed. By amending the NES for freshwater to not apply in the coastal marine area, that would leave it still clear that regional coastal plans would still apply with their status quo and could still empower, like ourselves, our Kotahi plan to come along with some even more stringent provisions that apply to coastal places and coastal wetlands in particular.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary further questions? Comments? I'm inviting comments. No? So, all in favour of receiving this report?
Aye.
Councillor Williams seconded it. He put his hand up.
I didn't see your hand move, but I must have.
Wow.
Have you seen my billboards? My finger's always pointing out.
Oh. Can I thank you for our extended attention in this, and thank you for those reports, Kerry and Gavin and others who reported to us. Just to say that we wish you a good trip, Councillor Barker.
Thank you.
And the rest of us.
Melbourne. 6 o'clock tonight.
Yes, I am looking at him with intent. Karakia whakamutunga pēr me karakia mō te kai.
You don't want to take it?
Ai? Kia ora koe.
Chair. I was just thinking that when this committee next meets, there may well be some different faces around the table.
Aye, there will be.
Oh, true.
So this might be your last opportunity to actually sort of uffy and hug and caress in the absence of masks. But I'll leave that for you to configure and determine.
He's referring to you, Rick.
I just wanted to acknowledge and reflect when I first came here and when I compare to now, just how far the Regional Planning Committee has come. And that's an acknowledgement and a tribute to each of you at the table. Because this is a co-governance committee and it's a unique committee in that no one else has anything like it. And I guess that's the part that both of you, perhaps joined with others, will be a focal point in terms of your next meeting with Darren Ponter, co-governance. Because I think when we were here the other day, Darren did indicate that co-governance isn't in the current lexicon, vocab. So just leave that with you, but I just wanted to acknowledge it's been a pleasure on behalf of our staff and our Chief Executive to report to you as a co-governance committee composing both mana whenua, tangata whenua, and our elected representatives. Mēnā ko tāku tū nei ki te mihi, kia koutou katoa.
I'm just going to jump in. Aroha mai. And then I'll hand it back to you. So I'm aware that Councillor Taylor and Councillor Barker are not standing in this upcoming election. So, yeah, it is going to be a change of people around the table. The rest of you, I wish you well in the upcoming elections because, hei aha, as Pierre has said, even for me, I've only been here a year, and it's just such a nice, cohesive, welcoming group. Who would think someone would pop in as a green and then be sitting as chair one day? So, kia ora koutou, and ngā mihi kia koe, Jackie, kia koe, Rick, mō tō haerenga, your journey in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I took a sound register of our whakataka te hau at the beginning.
Oh.
And I'm going to do another one, but I really beg that you sort of give it a bit more gusto. Kia kaha. And I'll set the pace. I really want to hear some volume. And then after that, and subject to that, I might bless the kai. Whakataka te hau.
Whakataka te hau ki toa. Kia ma, kina, kina, kina. E kia, he aturura, he sio, he huka, he hau, si hei mauri ora.
If we were right up north, they would say, ai, marika. Down here in Kahungunu, we say, tau ke. Over on the east coast, they say, what do they say over there? Ka mau te wehi.
Et.
But the volume was significant, so I think we should bless the kai. Your line is when you hear turu turu whakamaua kia tīna, your line is tīna, and then after that it's haumia hui e tai. Nau mai ngā nui hora nei hara mai koe whakatūpuna ku whakatūpua rangi tāwhi ki a rehua ki a tamati au mārama e rongo whakairea ki rungo turuturu whakamaua ki a Tina.
Tina.
Haumi e hui e.
Tae ki e.
Kia ora tata.
Kia ora.